opted to explain base regulations to her. He ordered her to leave the barracks immediately and wait in the recreation room, adding darkly that it would likely be a very long wait for Gomer. Ampey protested, worried about leaving the floor half-finished, but Carter was immovable. He also demanded that she remove the government-issued jacket and cap she was wearing. With Gomer's gentle help, Ampey removed the jacket and promised to wait for him. As she walked out the door, she gave Carter one last stern look, reminding him to mind the clean floor. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, Sergeant Carter unleashed a hurricane of fury. He paced back and forth, his voice echoing off the cinder-block walls as he yelled at Gomer. He called him a knucklehead and a lame brain, loudly listing the multiple severe infractions Gomer had just committed. 1. Having a civilian in the barracks. 2. Having a female civilian in the barracks. 3. Allowing a civilian to wear pieces of an official Marine Corps uniform. Carter screamed, demanding to know when Gomer would finally learn how to be a proper soldier after 3 long years of service. Right in the middle of his thunderous tirade, the door creaked open. Ampey poked her head back inside. She had heard the roaring voice from outside and came back to check if there was any trouble. Carter froze, his face a mass of restrained panic, while Gomer smiled innocently. Gomer assured her that there was absolutely nothing to worry about. He explained calmly that Sergeant Carter talked to him in this loud, passionate manner all the time. Ampey looked deeply unconvinced, but eventually nodded and slipped back outside. Carter let out an exasperated breath and turned back to Gomer, shaking his head in disbelief. He promised Gomer that he was going to assign him a punishment so memorable that he would never forget the rules again. A short time later, out in the blazing afternoon heat, Gomer was diligently executing his punishment. His task was utterly mindless. He had to shovel a massive pile of sand into a wheelbarrow, push it across the yard, dump it in a new spot, and then shovel it all back into the wheelbarrow to return it to the exact place he had started. As he wiped the sweat from his brow, Ampey appeared. She had grown terribly worried waiting in the recreation room and had come searching for him. When she saw him laboring over the pointless sand pile, she asked what he was doing. Gomer cheerfully explained the task. Ampey was horrified. She immediately understood that Gomer was being punished, and her heart broke knowing it was entirely her fault for insisting on helping him clean. Just then, Sergeant Carter marched over, his face thunderous once again. He coldly informed Ampey that civilians were not permitted to speak to the men while they were engaged in a disciplinary work detail. He firmly, almost forcefully, escorted her away, pointing her down a long, dusty road toward the main gates where she could catch a bus back to town. Ampey walked away, her heart heavy in her opinion of the United States Marines severely damaged. Later that afternoon, just outside the main gates of Camp Henderson, a popular local television and radio personality named Johnny Clark was conducting live interviews for his show. Johnny Clark at large. He was speaking with family members of the soldiers stationed at the base. Spotting Ampey looking flustered and upset, Johnny Clark approached her with a microphone. He politely asked how she had enjoyed her visit to the camp. Still burning with righteous indignation, Ampey leaned into the microphone and declared that she had not enjoyed it one bit. She announced to the listening audience that she had never been so shocked and surprised in all her life. She recounted the horrifying events of her afternoon. She described a man hollering and screaming at a sweet, innocent boy. She detailed the senseless cruelty of making a young man move a pile of sand back and forth for absolutely no reason. And she indignantly added that the same rude man had practically shoved her down the road to get rid of her. When the stunned host asked for the name of this terrible tyrant, Ampey boldly proclaimed it was Sergeant Carter. Johnny Clark, recognizing a golden opportunity for compelling entertainment, realized they were out of time for the radio segment. He eagerly invited Ampey to appear as a special guest on his evening television program the following night to tell her complete story. Still fired up with protective maternal instincts, Ampey readily agreed. The consequences of the radio broadcast were immediate. Back inside the camp, Corporal Boyle answered a ringing telephone in the company office. It was the base commander, the colonel, and he was not happy. The colonel demanded to see Sergeant Carter immediately. Carter, who had heard a recording of the broadcast, defensively yelled across the office that he had not pushed the woman, but the damage was done. He had to go face the music. The next morning at exactly 5:30, the barracks remained dead quiet. Normally, this was the exact moment Sergeant Carter would kick open the door and scream at the top of his lungs, banging a metal trash can to wake his platoon. Instead, the door opened softly. Sergeant Carter tiptoed into the room. In a voice as sweet as honey, he gently urged the gentleman to rise and shine. He walked over to Gomer's bunk and whispered his name softly, telling him a beautiful new day was dawning. Gomer woke up a start, deeply confused. He asked if the sergeant had hollered. Carter, forcing a massive, unnatural grin onto his face, insisted it had not hollered at all. Gomer stared at him, genuinely concerned, and pointed out that the sergeant's lips were spread out in a very strange manner. Carter, his eye twitching slightly, explained through gritted teeth that he was simply smiling. Once the men were outside, Corporal Boyle asked Carter what was going on with the bizarre nice guy routine. Carter admitted that after a highly uncomfortable chat with the colonel, he realized his career was in serious jeopardy. He knew Ampy was going on television that night. If she happened to visit the base again today, he needed her to see a completely different, gentle Sergeant Carter. He was determined to protect his hard-earned stripes. Even if being nice to Gomer-Pyle made him physically ill, out on the training field, Carter's patience was put to the ultimate test. He was gently encouraging the men through an obstacle course when Ampy unexpectedly returned. She stood on the sidelines, watching closely. Knowing she was watching, Carter continued his theatrical display of kindness. But then, Gomer made a catastrophic error during a combat simulation involving a practice grenade. It was a mistake so foolish that, had the grenade been real, it would have been disastrous. Carter's forced smile shattered. The sheer, deeply ingrained instinct of a Marine drill instructor took over. He erupted. He screamed at Gomer, his face turning a vibrant shade of purple, calling him stupid and berating him for his carelessness. Ampy watched the explosive outburst with wide eyes. Carter suddenly remembered she was there. He froze, then awkwardly tried to transition his furious scream into a gentle, soft-spoken correction. He turned to Ampy, desperately trying to prove he was a nice sergeant, speaking in a high, sweet voice. But Ampy had seen enough. She shook her head sadly, looking at Gomer with deep pity, utterly convinced that the boy was suffering under the rule of a madman. That evening, the entire platoon, including a deeply anxious Sergeant Carter, crowded around a small television set in the recreation room. Johnny Clark at large was on the air. Johnny Clark introduced his special guest, Miss B. Taylor. The camera focused on Aunt B, who looked lovely and composed under bright studio lights. The host reminded the audience of her complaints from the previous day regarding the unreasonable and tyrannical behavior of a certain Sergeant Carter. Carter buried his face in his hands, anticipating the end of his military career. The host asked Aunt B to elaborate on her experiences. Aunt B calmly agreed that upon her initial meetings with the sergeant, he had indeed seemed like a terribly ill-tempered man. She recounted the shouting, the yelling, and the seemingly unnecessary punishments. But then her tone shifted. She explained that after witnessing another incident earlier that day, she had finally sat down and had a long, serious talk with Gomer. She confessed to the television audience that she had been judging the military strictly from the soft, comfortable point of view of a civilian. Gomer, she explained, had patiently pointed out a vital truth to her. The military. The afternoon sun bathed the sprawling grounds of the United States Marine Corps base in a warm, golden light, casting long shadows across the impeccably swept walkways. Inside the bustling recreation room, a chorus of lively voices echoed against the wooden walls. Young men in their crisp uniforms were scattered about the large room, some reading quietly, others playing games, all enjoying a rare and well-deserved moment of weekend leisure. Among these men stood Private First Class Gomer-Pyle, a young man whose heart was as expansive as the endless blue skies over his beloved hometown of Mayberry, North Carolina. Gomer was a picture of earnest innocence. His tall frame and wide, genuine smile made him an instant friend to nearly everyone he met. As he stood near the recreational tables, savoring the peaceful Sunday atmosphere, a fellow Marine approached him and tapped him gently on the shoulder. "Hey, Pyle," the fellow soldier called out over the din of the room. "You have a visitor over in the recreation room." Gomer turned around, his eyes widening in pure astonishment. "A visitor?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine wonder. "To see me?" "Yes," his friend replied, a slight, teasing smile playing on his lips. "But do not get too excited. She is the motherly type." "The motherly type?" Gomer murmured to himself, lifting a large hand to gently scratch the side of his head. "I wonder who that could be." He turned toward the entrance, scanning the crowd of young soldiers. Suddenly, a familiar, comforting voice rang out, instantly transporting him back to the quiet, tree-lined streets of Mayberry. "Gomer!" Gomer gasped, his face lighting up like a morning sunrise. "Aunt Bee!" There she stood, Aunt Beatrice Taylor, a vision of small-town grace and maternal warmth. She wore a carefully pressed travel dress and carried a modest handbag, looking entirely